We're reading a chapter a day from this book, Here If You Need Me, by Kate Braestrup, a Unitarian Universalist minister and chaplain to the Maine game wardens. Today's chapter 8. Mr. Levesque was supposed to be home by supper time. His wife knew he was planning to ride the snowmobile out to his ice fishing shack on Hobbs Lake, and though she couldn't recall what he was wearing when he left, an inventory of his wardrobe revealed that his long johns, a frayed gray and blue plaid flannel shirt, and his black and green snowsuit and helmet were missing. He was probably wearing his big black moon boots too, and maybe the electric socks he got for Christmas. She told all this to the state trooper who was dispatched after the 911 call. Because he arrived first, the trooper had to ask questions that, however necessary, nonetheless added nuance and complexity to her fears. Does he have any friends who maybe you don't know well or wouldn't think of where he might have gone? Any, female friends who he might visit? What was his mood like lately? Any health problems you know about? Did he frequent bars? Any drug issues? No, no, no. My Jean-Pierre does not drink, not a drop, and no drugs either. He was out fishing for burbot, it being the season. He would have his fishing license on him, Mrs. Levesque said carefully to the game warden who turned up next. We'll worry about his fishing license after we find him, ma'am, the warden says, and smiles reassuringly at her. She hates the trooper by now, but the warden seems like a lovely man. He seems to get the picture when she says the urgent words, "My husband went out across the lake on his snowmobile and he wasn't home by supper time." The wardens are wonderful, she will later say. That state trooper wasn't any good at all, just kept saying my Jean-Pierre must be drunk with a woman in some motel room. But the warden went off right away to look for him. In fact, the state trooper asked the same questions that the warden would have asked if he had been the first officer to respond to the call. No one ever wants to gin up an elaborate ground search, calling in dog teams and volunteers, only to find that the missing person is safe and warm someplace and just didn't feel like calling home. It happens. Last winter, 15 game wardens and assorted hardy neighbors spent a long night in sub-zero weather scouring snowmobile trails for a snowmobiler who, as it turned out, really was drunk in a motel room with Miss Somebody Else. Weren't we all somewhat ticked? So an initial skepticism is standard. Even Ralph and Marion Moore, the parents of missing 6-year-old Allison, had been subtly probed for evidence of perfidy, and the sheriff's deputy who first responded to the picnic area near Masquinongee Pond would have looked around with an apparently casual eye for anything that struck him as out of place or wrong. Mr. Levesque had stopped at the Quick Mart near the boat launch for coffee and cigarettes and a couple of hand warmers, and the clerk wasn't sure but thought he headed off toward the boat launch. You could see Levesque's little corrugated tin shack from there, shining in the low, bright light of a rising moon. Sure enough, the warden found Levesque's pickup parked there, the snowmobile missing from the truck bed, a set of tracks going out across the ice, now glowing silver as the moon rose higher. The warden unloaded his snowmobile from his state-issued pickup truck. He rooted around under a pile of assorted gear in the back seat until he found the duffel with his snowsuit, helmet, thick gloves, and boots. The snowmobile roared to life, and the warden buzzed out to Levesque's ice shack. He noted several empty brandy bottles lined up neatly along the far wall behind a Lilliputian wood stove, a couple of fishing magazines, some fishing lines stiff with ice, and a paper bag containing wrappings left over from a meal of sandwiches, Cheez-Its, and powdered mini donuts. There was no evidence that any fish were caught that day, no scales or blood by the fishing hole. The warden shined his flashlight into the hole. Maybe 2 feet down, the black water reflected the beam back, but the water was beginning to ice over. It was hard to tell with his cold hand, but the saucer-sized top of the little stove seemed slightly warm. Depending on how much brandy Levesque had in him after his day of peace and solitude on the ice, he could have lost his way. A quick circuit of the lake took an hour, and the warden paid particular attention to the little inlets and nooks into which Levesque might have strayed. One deep inlet, angling off to the left, perhaps a 1/4 mile from the boat launch, looked promising. The warden knew that a big stream, almost a river, really, entered the lake at that point, and the ice would therefore be uneven, treacherous, and thin in spots. He shined his powerful flashlight as far up the inlet as he could, and thought he saw a dark patch, an opening in the water, but he couldn't be sure. He called for reinforcements, did some ground searching on foot along the edges of the lake, and had the sheriff's department check the local motels and night spots just in case. And he let Lieutenant Allen and the dive team know that they might be going under the ice in the morning. Mrs. Levesque spent a long night trying to think of good reasons for Jean-Pierre to be absent. She called and recalled friends and hospitals. She pictured her husband, cold and frightened, possibly in pain from an injury, hungry and abandoned under the cold sky. She imagined him sitting somewhere in a bar, warm and drunk, chatting up the barmaid. She imagined him murdered for his bait by another ice fisherman, kidnapped by devil worshippers, abducted by aliens. She did not sleep. A neighbor came to sit with her for a time, which was a blessing, and her sister promised that she would start down from Montreal in the morning if Jean-Pierre hadn't turned up by then. Folks sometimes find their way back on their own steam, the warden told her gently. Give a call if Jean-Pierre does come home, no matter how happy and relieved or angry you might be. Otherwise, I'll be out looking for him, okay? Mrs. Levesque started at each creaking door, every sound of a car engine going by on the road, but Jean-Pierre did not return. First light revealed not only an open patch of dark water in the inlet near the boat launch, but also a neat set of snowmobile tracks leading right to it. By 8 o'clock that morning, I am standing on the ice with Lieutenant Allen, in time to see Warden Don Carpenter, encased in thick neoprene, waddle to the hole where the black water steams. His dive partner, Rob Greenlaw, is already underwater. The orange nylon tether that connects Rob to the surface is held loosely in another warden's gloved right hand. Warden Alex Hatch isn't suited up to dive yet. He'll go in after Don and Rob come out, if there isn't a find before then. Alex is going to maintain contact with the divers from the surface by radio. He carefully clips Don to a yellow tether. Let me hear your comm gear, he says. Don obediently replies, hello, hello, hello. You're good, go ahead. Don flumps down clumsily onto the ice under his load of canned air and rolls into the water. The sleek dome of his neoprene dive hood is visible for a moment. Then he's under, his yellow tether running out through Alex's left hand. Can you hear him? Lieutenant Allen asks, and Alex nods. Alex says, keep talking to me, boys. The scene is blindingly white. White ice, white sky, white birches on the shoreline caked with snow, and eerily quiet, unusually so for a warden service operation. Despite the cold, we do not huddle together, as it is generally unwise, even on thick ice, to concentrate more weight in one spot than is absolutely necessary. We don't chit-chat, swap jokes, or engage in the usual banter, because an ice dive is dangerous. We focus as if the diver's work requires our complete attention as well as their own. Retreating back into the hood of my dark green parka, I imagine our comrades groping slowly through the black water, thick with ice crystals. It's like swimming through a coffee colada, Alex told me once. Because the incoming stream roils the debris in the water, the visibility, or viz, is terrible. The divers have to feel around with their hands for a snowmobile or a body. I keep my eyes glued to Alex. He wears a headset with a microphone at his mouth, and he keeps shaking his head to one side as if to clear his ears. Damn, he says after a while. Don said something, but I don't know what it is. Two heads pop up in the water, one after the other. Don and Rob haul themselves onto the ice and lie there, resting, while local volunteer firefighters are dispatched to ask nearby residents for buckets of hot water to thaw the communications gear. I found the sled, Rob announces, pawing the air in front of him to show how this was done. It's just forward of the hole. I'll buoy it when I go back down. Are you okay to go down again? Want me to suit up? Alex asked him. I'm okay. What's the air temp anyway, Rob wonders. -1 or 2. Shit. When the hot water arrives, the divers hunch over the buckets, letting the steam thaw the microphones in their masks, which now dangle from their chest harnesses. I try to imagine the steam warming them as well. On other dives, I found myself snuggling warden divers as if I could lend them maternal body heat, but neoprene insulates in both directions. Neither touch nor steam can warm them through those suits. Don crawls to the hole and flops back in. Rob flops in after him, bubbles rising. On shore, another diver waits, fully suited, in case Alex orders a rescue. Diving is a relatively dangerous activity even when a diver is in clear water, looking at pretty fish on a reef in the West Indies. Here, the conditions are terrible. An uneven lake bed with plenty of dead trees and debris to snag a diver's lines, no visibility to speak of, and 30 feet or so of dark, moving water. Plus, Lieutenant Allen explains, you've got a lid between you and the air that's nearly a foot thick. There's only one way under the ice and only one way out. Just watching the bubbles rise made my breathing labored from sheer, empathetic claustrophobia. A strange, whining roar erupted far up in the woods where the little river ran back into the land. In a moment, an airboat, powered by an enormous fan, came flying down the iced-in riverbed, slid spectacularly sideways onto the frozen lake, and slithered to a stop about 20 feet from where I stood. The pilots, game wardens in Darth Vader helmets and glowing orange jumpsuits, waved. Nice landing, Lieutenant Allen growled. Unabashed, the warden at the wheel flipped up his visor and greeted me. Hey, Kate, how are you? It was Ron Dunham. I'm cold, thanks. You? You know, when the ice breaks, we'll still float, Ron pointed out cheerily. Want to come aboard? It was an irresistible invitation. I perched on the gunwale, fat as a winter robin in my layers of insulated snow gear. I didn't know this thing could travel across ice, I said. Ah, yeah, she can skim right across the parking lot. When they find this guy, we're going to fly the body out in riverbed to Route 205. We could take it right down the interstate if we had plates on her. Really? I squeaked, deeply impressed. No, Ron said. With a well-padded fist, he punched me gently in my well-padded shoulder. Do you believe everything we tell you, Kate? Just about, I admitted. That's why we like you, Ron said. He pointed to the opening in the ice. Who's down? Don and Robbie. They've been under about 10 minutes on this go. They already found the snowmobile. Won't be long then. The body won't have gone far. Even with the current? Current's not that strong, Lieutenant Allen said. Unless it's got buoyancy for some reason, like he has air trapped in his parka or something, the body will go right to the bottom and stay there. The viz is the only thing that's slowing this down, I should think. Alex Hatch suddenly straightened and held up his hand for silence. Then he turned his head, grinning. They're coming up, he said, relief in his voice. Don was him. Don has him. Mr. Levesque's body is a stiff, black and lime green shape on the ice. His helmet, strangely shiny and new-looking, rests next to his feet, one of which is still encased in a moon boot. The other is wearing a wet, white sock, and I have the irrational desire to pull the boot back on it lest his foot get cold. The divers are off, making a waddling beeline for the dive trailer where a thermos of scalding soup awaits. A big blower heater will blast them back to life. Bring them over here, boys, where the ice is thicker, Lieutenant Allen tells the remaining wardens. We'll let Chaplain Katie grease the skids for this guy. He makes a vague cross with his mittened hand, gazes heavenward by way of illustration, and then we'll bag him. I kneel on the ice near the dead man's head. His flesh is yellowish white. His wet hat still smells slightly but discernibly of Tide detergent. Beneath us lay 8 to 10 inches of water crystallized into solid form. A temporary solid plane between liquid and gas supports the dead man, the wardens, and me. The snowmobile, now tethered to a floating yellow buoy, is under us, down in the mud where the hibernating turtles wait for spring and resurrection. I take off my thick glove. I make the sign of the cross on Mr. Levesque's hard, frozen forehead. I say the prayers his wife requested. I'm not a Catholic priest, I told her gently, stating the obvious. There's one God, she said. You make the sign of the cross for him on his head, like so, if you find him dead. Jean Pierre was raised Catholic, she told me, gripping my hand, even if he didn't go to Mass much, even if he did drink brandy in his fishing shack, even if he did drive drunkenly across the ice, take a wrong turn. He was a good man, a dear man. He would want his prayers, his wife told me, and the sign of the cross on his forehead. I'm conscious of the softness and warmth of my thumb as I draw it across Jean-Pierre's skin. His eyes are closed. Into your gentle hands, dear Father, I commend the spirit of your child, Jean-Pierre Levesque. The wardens stand by quietly. On the shore, the volunteer firefighters, assorted onlookers, and a small contingent of very cold reporters from the local paper bow their heads. When I'm finished, I say amen, and they say amen, and the wardens move in with the body bag. Someone pats my back, a couple of good friendly thumps on the way past. I can't meet anyone's eyes. What if I have unnaturally small pupils, bloodshot sclera, and a visible nystagmus in my gaze? I don't mind saying prayers solely to satisfy other people's wish for prayers to be said. Indeed, that's what I invariably imagine myself to be doing as I kneel. So why, as soon as my knees touch down and my hand comes to rest on the forehead of the deceased, do I have this sense of communion? And why am I mildly disoriented, clumsy in my speech, and unsteady on my legs when I'm finished? Mystery, my properly Christian friends would say. It's just the mystery, Kate. My hands are damp and muddy. Mud rode up from the bottom of the lake on the brim of Jean-Pierre's hat and moved from there to my hands. The wardens remind each other to tighten their abs and use their legs before prying the man's body from the ice where it has already started to stick. I wipe my hands on the thighs of my snow pants, but my hands will smell of thawing lake mud all day. They will smell of early spring when I go to tell the new widow that her Jean-Pierre has been found dead. She will clasp my muddy hands, then seize my body. Literally hot with grief, Mrs. Levesque will sag against the front of my uniform jacket, and we will both descend to the kitchen floor. I'm so sorry, I will say, holding her. Lieutenant Allen will be a big, solid shape at my back, his square hand resting on the kitchen counter, his head bent attentively over us. He will make low, affirmative throat sounds when I say, I think it was very quick. I don't think he suffered. He looked very peaceful, Mrs. Levesque. The lieutenant's knee will brace me between my shoulder blades as I hold her. I made the sign of the cross on his forehead. I said prayers for him. Mrs. Levesque will put me to use as witness, as crutch, as Kleenex, as proxy for Jean-Pierre, a temporary substitute for all the neighbors, church folk, friends, and family members who will soon come bursting through her door to share her grief. I am a transitional love object, an objet d'amour. I am Rab, Blanky, Jesus, Mama. What a strange privilege it is to be so used. The lieutenant will muse as we drive south together. It's like standing right on the hinge of someone's life, you know? Right there on the hinge, while the whole world swings around and that widow or that mother or dad's life is suddenly completely different, permanently different. I've been a game warden for 32 years. I can't think how many people I've had to tell about a death. How many people have that memory of me standing there saying those words? It's really something to be on the hinge of so many stories. It is, I say. It's really something. Lieutenant Allen drives with his right hand. His left elbow is braced against the sill of the truck's side window, his left forefinger draped across his upper lip in a characteristic gesture. He'll be retiring soon. No more dive team call-outs, no more death notifications, no more deaths, other than the personal ones we all might as well prepare ourselves to endure. His thinning white hair reveals a distinct tan line that travels around his scalp. On the back of his head, there's a tan semicircle where his warden service cap leaves room for size adjustments. After a little while, the lieutenant sighs. He takes out his tin of tobacco, puts a pinch of it into the well-worn pouch this habit has created in his lower lip. Sweet woman, he says thoughtfully. A damn shame, really. It's the end of chapter 8.